Story teaser. A struggling mechanic pulls over in a snowstorm to help an elderly man stranded by the side of the road. What begins as a routine act of kindness unfolds into a life-altering encounter. Because the man he saves isn't just a retiree, he's a former CEO of a billion-dollar company, looking for someone worthy to inherit everything. But will the quiet man with oil-stained hands and a broken past be ready to accept a legacy he never asked for? Story opening. The snow came down in thick, lazy flakes, turning the sky a dull shade of white and blanketing the narrow roads outside Pine Hollow like a soft trap. Lucas Brandt gripped the wheel of his rust-bitten truck tighter, squinting through the frost-laced windshield as the wipers creaked back and forth. The heater wheezed out more noise than warmth. But Lucas didn't mind the cold much anymore. It had become something of a companion over the years, sharp, honest, and predictable. Unlike most of life, he had just finished a 12-hour shift under the dim lights of Juno's Auto and was hoping to get home before the worst of the storm kicked in. Penny, his daughter, would be waiting, most likely with a reheated can of soup and that wide, tired smile she tried so hard to make cheerful. The roads were empty, quiet, until he saw the shape, an old Lincoln stalled at the shoulder. Hood up, blinkers flashing like a soft SOS in the snow. For a second, Lucas debated it. He didn't have the time. He didn't have the energy. But he pulled over anyway, muttering under his breath as he grabbed his gloves. Because that's just who he was. A man who stopped. A man who helped. Even when the world never really helped him back. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed, was that this wasn't just a broken-down car. It was the beginning of something else. Something much, much bigger. The man stood on the driver's side, shoulders hunched against the wind, his gloved hands fumbling with the hood latch like someone who hadn't touched an engine in decades. He wore a dark wool coat, long enough to brush the tops of his polished shoes, and a navy scarf knotted carefully at the throat. Not the kind of man you'd expect out here in the middle of nowhere. Not the kind of man who usually needed help. Lucas stepped into the slush, boots sinking into the roadside bank, and called out over the wind, "Need a hand?" The man straightened slowly, turning with a quiet sort of dignity. His face was lined, his skin pale from the cold, and his hair, mostly white, peeked out from beneath a charcoal cap. "I'd be grateful," he said, voice crisp but warm, like a radio host from another time. "Seems I'm not as mechanically inclined as I once was." Lucas nodded, already lifting the hood. "Let's take a look." The engine compartment was clean. Too clean. A newer battery. Fresh spark plugs. This wasn't some neglected beater. It had been maintained. Lucas frowned. "What happened?" he asked, glancing sideways. "Just died on you." The man gave a small smile. "Pulled off to take a call, and when I tried to start again, nothing. Figured it might be the starter." Lucas nodded again, keeping his thoughts to himself. Starter was a safe guess. Too safe. Most folks guessed wrong. But this guy spoke like someone who'd read up just enough to sound believable. Lucas didn't press it. He swapped out the cables, checked the fuse, ran a jump from his truck. Within minutes, the engine sputtered to life, smooth and steady. The old man exhaled like he'd just finished a long speech. "Impressive," he said. "You work around here." "Juno's Auto," Lucas replied. "East end of town. Been there a while." The man studied him. "You own it." Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. "No, sir. Just turn the wrenches." The man offered his hand. "John. No last name necessary today." Lucas hesitated, then shook. The grip was firm, measured. "Lucas," he said. "Brandt. Nice to meet you." Lucas Brandt. Something about the way he said it made Lucas pause, like the name meant something, like it had weight. But the man just smiled again, thanked him, and got into his car. Lucas returned to his truck, shaking off the cold. Watching the Lincoln ease back onto the road, he figured that was the end of it. Just another stranger in the snow. Just another fix-it job on a long, gray day. But something about it sat differently in his chest. Not heavy. Exactly. More like the feeling you get when you forget something important and can't quite put your finger on it. He didn't know then that John was watching from his rearview mirror, that he'd already made a note, that the man Lucas had just helped wasn't some lost retiree, but a man with a file full of resumes back home, and none of them impressed him as much as the quiet mechanic who didn't even ask for a tip. Lucas didn't think about the old man again, not in any serious way, until 3 days later, when a black town car pulled into the gravel lot of Juno's Auto. It stood out like a tuxedo at a barn dance, polished to a mirror shine, not a speck of dust on the chrome. The kind of vehicle that didn't belong in a place where oil stains and rust were just part of the decor. Lucas was under the hood of a Chevy Impala when the driver's door opened. A man in a tailored coat stepped out, holding a thick envelope in one gloved hand. "Mr. Brandt," he called. Lucas wiped his hands on a rag. Suspicious already. "Yeah." The man smiled politely, extended the envelope. "Mr. John Whitmore asked me to deliver this to you personally." Lucas blinked. "Who?" "John. The man you helped on Route 9 during the snowstorm." Lucas took the envelope slowly, watching as the man tipped his head and walked back to the car, which drove off without another word. It wasn't sealed, just folded with weight. Inside, Lucas found a handwritten letter, crisp, elegant, penned in looping script. The message was short. Your kindness stood out. I'd like to offer you an opportunity. Join me for lunch. Whitmore Estate. Noon, Friday. Beneath that was an address and a small black business card, embossed with only a name. Lucas turned it over, heart thudding slightly. He didn't know what to make of it. But something in the tone of the letter, the precision of the gesture, it felt deliberate, calculated, but not in a cruel way, like someone testing the weight of a possibility. He almost didn't go. Friday morning came with fresh snow. Penny's school had a 2-hour delay, and the shop was short-staffed. But something in Lucas stirred, a low hum in his chest that hadn't been there in years. The address led him to the north edge of town, past where the roads turned from asphalt to cobblestone, and the map started to lose confidence. The Whitmore estate was unlike anything he'd seen in real life. Wrought iron gates swung open without a word, and the long drive wound through acres of manicured pines. The mansion itself was a quiet giant, stone and timber, regal without being showy. When Lucas stepped inside, the warmth hit him first, followed by the smell of cedar and something rich simmering from the kitchen. He was led to a sunroom that looked more like a private library, leather chairs, tall windows, and a fire crackling behind a black marble hearth. And there sat John, same wool coat draped over the chair beside him, reading a newspaper like it was still in '87. "Mr. Brandt," he greeted with a nod. "Thank you for coming." Lucas hesitated, then took the seat opposite. "I'm not sure what this is." John folded the paper neatly, set it aside. "It's a conversation." "That's all?" A maid appeared with coffee, 2 cups. Nothing fancy. John poured for both, then settled back. "You're a father," he said matter-of-factly. "Hard worker, no complaints. Loyal, talented with your hands. But there's more going on behind your eyes than busted radiators." Lucas stiffened slightly. "I don't understand what you're getting at." John smiled, calm and disarming. "I'm looking for someone, not to hire, to succeed." Lucas blinked. "Succeed what?" "Me." John leaned forward, voice low and sure. "I built something over 40 years. A company, a legacy. No children, no heirs, and no desire to lab it to boardroom wolves." Lucas didn't speak, didn't move. He wasn't sure if this was a joke or some strange test he'd already failed. But John just kept talking, as if the idea had already taken root. I've watched 100 men talk themselves into power, but I've only seen a handful who earned it quietly. Men who helped strangers in the snow without needing a reason. Men like you. Lucas stared into his coffee, not sure if he should drink it or run, because nothing in his life had ever sounded this impossible, or this dangerously close to hope. Lucas left the estate in a fog. The snow had stopped, but the cold still clung to everything like a second skin. He drove with the windows cracked just enough to let in the sting of winter air, trying to clear his head. What John had said, it didn't make sense. People didn't just offer empires to mechanics with debt on their boots and calluses in their dreams. And yet, John Whitmore had sat there with absolute certainty, talking about mentorship, about a future built not on boardroom polish but on grit, loyalty, and instinct. Lucas wanted to laugh, wanted to forget it, but a part of him, buried deep under years of routine and resignation, sparked like an old engine catching fire for the first time in years. He didn't mention it to Penny. That night, she fell asleep on the couch watching cartoons, her favorite stuffed bear tucked beneath her chin and a math workbook open on her lap. Lucas covered her with a blanket, kissed her forehead, and sat beside her long after the credits rolled. He remembered when she was born, how tiny she'd been in that hospital blanket, how scared he'd been to hold her, how his wife, pale and tired, had whispered, "Whatever happens, just don't give up on her." He hadn't, even when the cancer took everything else. He'd kept going for Penny. He fixed cars, skipped meals, worked late nights and early mornings, never complained, because giving up wasn't an option. But what if Whitmore was something more than just a test? What if it was a second chance? Not just for him, but for Penny too. The next day at work, everything felt different. The hiss of compressed air, the clang of metal, the scent of oil and rust, it was all the same. But it felt temporary, like a place he might one day say goodbye to. Juno, the shop owner, didn't notice the shift. He never really looked at anyone unless they messed up a job or were late clocking in. Lucas did both jobs that day fast and clean, not because he had something to prove, but because he knew now that someone had finally seen him, really seen him. 2 days later, the town car returned. Another note, this one shorter. Let's build something. Saturday, noon. No signature, just that same embossed card, black and perfect. Lucas showed up, this time in his cleanest pair of jeans and a flannel shirt that didn't have any holes. John greeted him in the same quiet room. But this time, there was a laptop open and a stack of old blueprints spread across the table. For the next hour, John talked, not in speeches, but in stories, about mistakes made and lessons learned, about how innovation wasn't about technology, but about seeing what others missed. He didn't talk numbers. He talked people, and by the end of it, Lucas wasn't just listening. He was leaning forward, asking questions, making notes, offering ideas. It wasn't about cars or mechanics anymore. It was about values, about legacy, about the kind of work that doesn't show up in quarterly reports but changes lives anyway. That night, Lucas lay awake staring at the ceiling. Penny snored softly from the other room, and the wind howled through the eaves. But Lucas didn't hear any of it. He kept thinking about the moment John said, "You have something most men waste a lifetime searching for, purpose, and you live it without even realizing it." Lucas wanted to believe that, wanted to let it settle into his bones and chase out all the doubt. But something old and stubborn in him still whispered, "Don't get used to this. It's not real." And yet, it felt real, more real than anything he'd touched in a long time. He didn't know what came next. But for the first time in years, he wanted to find out. Lucas started spending every Saturday at the estate, What began as awkward meetings with coffee and conversation quickly evolved into something else. John didn't teach in the traditional sense. There were no lectures, no outlines. Instead, he challenged Lucas with real scenarios, old company problems, strategic failures, stories of betrayal and triumph pulled straight from 4 decades in the trenches. Lucas listened, took notes, asked questions that made John pause, then smile. The more they talked, the more Lucas realized that his years under hoods and behind busted dashboards hadn't dulled his mind, they'd sharpened it. Where others saw spreadsheets, he saw people. Where most focused on profits, he saw the cost of pressure. He'd been living it for years. One afternoon, John handed him a binder. Thick, leather-bound, stamped with the company's original logo. This, he said, is everything. The numbers, the patents, the lawsuits, the ugly stuff. If you're going to lead, you have to see it all, not just the polished legacy. Lucas hesitated, fingers brushing over the worn cover. This wasn't just paperwork. It was a test, a trust fall. He took it home and spent 2 nights reading until 2 weeks, flipping through quarterly losses, labor disputes, notes scrawled in the margins about backroom deals and partnerships that fell apart before they began. It was raw, real, and riddled with contradictions. But it was honest, and Lucas respected that. At the shop, things started to shift. Juno noticed, "You've been walking around here like you got a secret." He grumbled one morning. Lucas just smiled and kept his head down. But the truth was, he did. He started seeing the business differently. Not just fixing cars, but customer service bottlenecks, supply chain gaps, the inefficiency of how they handled invoices. He made suggestions, small ones at first. Juno dismissed them with a wave. But the other guys in the garage started paying attention. "You should run this place," one of them joked. Lucas just shrugged, but the idea didn't sound as crazy as it used to. Penny noticed, too. She saw the way her dad smiled more. Came home not exhausted but energized. He even started talking about the future again. "What would you think about moving someday?" he asked over dinner one night. "Somewhere with a backyard. Maybe a garage of our own." Penny's eyes lit up. "Can I paint my room?" she asked. Lucas chuckled. "Any color you want." Then came the invitation that changed everything. John called it a small gathering, but Lucas quickly realized it was anything but. Dozens of sharply dressed men and women filled the estate's great room, sipping wine, discussing markets and mergers with the ease of people who'd never missed a bill payment in their lives. Lucas felt out of place, his clean flannel suddenly a costume. But John stayed close, introducing him to everyone with the same phrase. "This is Lucas Brandt. He's going to change things." Some people nodded politely. Others raised eyebrows. One man, a CFO from one of John's subsidiaries, smirked and whispered just loud enough, "We'll see about that." Lucas heard it, filed it away, didn't react. John pulled him aside later. "They're testing you," he said plainly. "They think you're a novelty, a charity project, but I see what they don't. You understand people. You understand pressure. That's what leadership really is." Lucas didn't respond right away. He stared out the window at the snowy fields beyond the glass. "What if I mess it up?" he asked. John smiled. "Slow and sure. Then you learn, and you do it better. That's what I've done every year since 1979. That night, as he drove home, Penny asleep in the back seat from the long drive and too many cookies, Lucas felt something solid settle in his chest. Not certainty, but direction. And that was more than he'd had in a long time. It wasn't long before the whispers started. A few articles, subtle and vague, began circling trade blogs and regional business columns. Reclusive CEO mentoring unknown mechanic. Succession plan shocks insiders. Lucas didn't read them at first, but John handed him a folder one day with the clippings inside. "They're watching," he said. They'll talk. Let them. It means you're on their radar. Lucas skimmed the headlines, his jaw tightening. Not because of the skepticism, but because of the picture one article had used. Penny, smiling in the background during a community event John had hosted last weekend. They leave her out of this, Lucas said flatly. John nodded. They will. I'll see to it. And Lucas believed him, because despite all the power and polish, John still talked to his housekeeper by name, still made his own coffee every morning, still checked on their groundskeepers like they were part of his board. It was the kind of leadership Lucas could understand, quiet, human, grounded. One afternoon, Lucas sat across from a round table of executives brought in from across the country. It wasn't formal. No suits, no stage, just coffee, notebooks, and hard questions. What would you do about the distribution center in Missouri? One woman asked, her tone clipped and skeptical. Lucas thought for a second. Move it closer to rail and port access. It's outdated and boxed in. We're bleeding logistics dollars. We don't need to. A man in a tie loosened his collar. How would you fund the relocation? Sell the empty Nevada facility we've been holding since 2013. Cut the loss and repurpose the capital. Silence. Then a nod. Then a scribbled note. They were testing him, and he was passing. Back at Juneau's, tension crackled like static in the air. Word had gotten out. Someone had spotted Lucas leaving a black car outside a downtown conference center. Another saw him on a business lunch with a man in a $1,000 coat. Juneau pulled him aside. What's going on? Brant, he asked. Not angry, just wary. Lucas could have lied, could have dodged it. But instead, he said, something big, something good. And I don't know how long I'll be here. Juneau didn't say much after that, just nodded and walked away. Things were never quite the same after that. But Lucas didn't blame him. When the world starts shifting under your feet, not everyone's going to keep walking with you. At home, Penny asked more questions. Why are you gone so much? Why do people say you're going to be a boss? Lucas explained the best he could that sometimes life gives you a shot, and you don't always know where it'll land. But you've got to take it. She nodded like she understood, then asked if that meant they could finally get a dog. Lucas laughed, heart lighter than it had been in days. Maybe, he said, maybe we can get two. Then came the day John didn't show. Lucas arrived at the estate for their weekly strategy session, but the staff was quiet, somber. A maid named Edith met him at the door. He's in the hospital, she said gently. Heart complications. They caught it early. Lucas's chest tightened. He asked for the hospital name, drove straight there. Didn't stop to think. When he walked into the private suite, John looked smaller somehow. Still sharp, but tired in a way Lucas hadn't seen before. Guess it's time we talk timeline, John said, half joking, but Lucas didn't smile. He pulled a chair close. I'm not ready, he admitted. You will be, John replied. But here's the truth. Lucas, none of us ever are. We just do it anyway, because waiting for perfect only wastes time. Lucas stayed for hours. They talked about contingencies, about people to trust, people to watch, about vision, not just for the company, but for the kind of culture John wanted to protect. That night, Lucas went home and sat on the porch in the cold, watching the stars blink overhead. He thought about his life before all of this, the long hours, the broken dreams, the grief he'd swallowed just to keep going. And he thought about what it meant to inherit not just a company, but a man's life's work. And for the first time, he didn't feel afraid. He felt ready, not perfect, but ready enough to try. John didn't bounce back the way he used to. The hospital released him after a few days, but the sparkle in his step had dulled. His movements slower, his pauses longer. Lucas noticed it immediately. The way John sat more than he stood. the way he looked out of windows like a man counting moments. But he also noticed something else, urgency. Their meetings picked up pace. John pushed harder, dug deeper, forced Lucas to think not like a worker, but like a leader. Every decision you make, he said one afternoon, ripples through people, families, communities. Know your numbers, but feel your responsibility. Lucas scribbled notes furiously, his jaw tight with focus. It wasn't just about learning anymore. It was about preparing, and time was clearly running out. One evening, John handed him a sealed envelope. "Don't open this unless something happens to me," he said quietly. "And if it does, don't hesitate." Lucas stared at the envelope, his name written in perfect cursive across the front. It felt heavier than paper should. "Why me?" he asked again, voice low. John smiled, eyes tired but steady. "Because you've lived at the bottom and still kept your soul. That's the kind of man who won't forget what matters when he's at the top." Lucas didn't argue. He just slipped the envelope into his coat and nodded once. Because by now, he understood that trust wasn't a gift, it was a call to rise. Weeks passed, and the company board began circling. John insisted on including Lucas in every executive session, every strategic call. At first, it was awkward. Eyes lingered too long on his worn boots, his quiet confidence mistaken for uncertainty. But the more he spoke, the more the tone shifted. Lucas didn't talk circles. He talked solutions, real ones, grounded in experience, in logic, in the truth of someone who'd spent more time in the mud than in meetings. He saw the inefficiencies no one else noticed, and he spoke with the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to carry weight. Back at home, life was changing too. Penny had started drawing floor plans in her sketchpad, dream houses, big kitchens, rooms with names like Hope Room and Dog Palace. She didn't ask if the future was coming anymore. She knew. Lucas would sometimes sit on the edge of her bed after she fell asleep, the quiet hum of her nightlight casting soft shapes on the walls, and think about how far they'd come, from soup cans and unpaid bills to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. It didn't feel real, but it felt earned. Then one morning, Lucas received the call he'd been dreading. John had collapsed at home. The ambulance came too late. Just like that. He was gone. Lucas sat in his truck outside the garage, envelope in hand, the town still asleep around him. He didn't cry, not then. Instead, he opened the letter. Inside, just a single page. "You're ready. Trust your gut. Lead with heart. Don't try to be me, be better. All my shares, all my rights, all my faith. Yours now. Joe." Lucas folded the paper, took a breath that hurt his chest, and turned the key in the ignition. The sun was rising over Pine Hollow, slow and quiet. And for the first time, Lucas didn't just feel like a man holding someone else's dream. He felt like a man ready to carry his own. Lucas didn't waste time. Within a week, the transfer of ownership was complete. He stood before the board, not in a suit, but in his cleanest work shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands steady. He laid out his vision, not just for growth, but for integrity. He spoke about investing in workers, not just technology, about rebuilding trust where greed had frayed it. The room was quiet at first, then curious, then engaged. Some doubted, some nodded, but all of them listened. Because Lucas didn't promise miracles. He promised work, real work, and people understood that language. Back home, life shifted in quiet ways. Penny transferred to a private school closer to the estate. Her world suddenly filled with science labs and art classes she used to only read about. Lucas built a workshop on the property, not to fix cars, but to think. He kept a few old engines around, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to remember where he came from. The company thrived under his leadership. Slowly, then suddenly, efficiency improved. Morale soared. Clients stayed. The press changed its tone from skepticism to admiration. The mechanic CEO, they called him. He didn't mind. It was true. Every now and then, Lucas would walk the estate grounds alone, hands in his pockets, boots crunching gravel. He'd look out at the horizon and think about that day in the snow. The stalled car, the man with the wool coat and calm eyes. And he'd smile because he understood now what John had really seen in him. Not a replacement, a builder, a man who knew how to start over, who had already done the hardest thing anyone can do, keep going. When everything else falls apart, and somehow, through it all, find a way to still believe in something better. Sometimes, life doesn't hand you a second chance with a big sign or a perfect moment. Sometimes, it shows up as a stranger stuck in the snow, a cup of black coffee across a quiet table, or a folded letter that changes everything. This story isn't just about a mechanic who got lucky. It's about showing up even when the world doesn't notice, about doing the right thing when no one's watching, and about how the smallest acts of kindness can echo far beyond what we ever imagine. Lucas didn't chase power. He earned trust. He didn't wait to be ready. He showed up anyway. And maybe that's the real secret. Greatness doesn't come from where you start. It comes from how you carry yourself when no one believes you're meant to finish first. If this story touched something in you, if you believe that hard work, decency, and a little heart still matter, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Send it to someone who could use a little hope. And if you want more stories like this, stories of grit, redemption, and the quiet miracles that shape our lives, make sure to follow, subscribe, and stick with us. Because sometimes all it takes is one story to remind us that life's not over until we decide to stop trying. And the best chapters, they're often the ones we never saw coming.